Someone handed me a secret recording.
We've got to get rid of all those loose ends, okay?
For years now, I've been investigating this guy.
What, you stab her in the neck with a knife?
He's known as Mr. Big. His tentacles spread to the very heart of the justice system.
I don't just need it under the carpet, I need it to be fixed.
I'm Alicia Bridges. I find out who he really is in Mr. Big, a new true crime podcast from Unravel. Search for Unravel now on the ABC Listen app.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
The week started with Erin Patterson's estranged husband on the stand. It ended with her son giving evidence. I'm the ABC's court reporter, Kristian Silva.
And I'm Stephen Stockwell. It is Friday the 9th of May. We've just reached the end of the second week of this trial. You're listening to Mushroom Case Daily.
The small-town mystery that's gripped the nation and made headlines around the world.
Ms. Patterson admits she lied to police about foraging for mushrooms.
A doctor says he told Erin Patterson she could die without urgent treatment.
At the heart of this case will be the jury's interpretation of Erin Patterson's intentions.
It's a tragedy what's happened. I love them.
So in today's episode, Kristian, we will run through the second week of Erin Patterson's trial, talk through some of the stuff that has stood out to us, things we remembered, also catch up with the ABC's true crime investigative reporter, Rachael Brown, and we'll get to some of your questions as well. Before we do that, can you give us the top line of today? What did we see in court?
Today was only a half day in court, so there's a bit less to talk about from today. We got the final 12 or so minutes of the police interview from Erin Patterson's daughter, and straight after that, the jury was played about 1.5 hours of her son's interview. Both of these kids took a police officer through their memories of what happened before the lunch, on the day of the lunch, and in the aftermath. And then the jury was sent home for the weekend.
Thank you, Kristian. And if you are just joining us on Mushroom Case Daily, if you haven't been following this story along, this trial revolves around a lunch that Erin Patterson held in July of 2023. There's a few names you will hear. Erin Patterson is one. She's the woman who's on trial for murder and attempted murder. You'll also hear about Don and Gail Patterson. That is Erin's mother and father-in-law. You'll also hear about Ian Wilkinson and Heather Wilkinson. Ian is a pastor of the Patterson's family's church, and Heather is Gail's sister. And also Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband. His parents are Don and Gail Patterson, and Ian was his pastor as well. So it gives you a bit of an update on who the key players are in this. And something you will hear a lot about this lunch is beef Wellington. That is the meal that was served to these guests. It was the meal that was the last meal for three of them who passed away following the lunch. Ian Wilkinson survived the lunch, and we heard evidence from him earlier this week in the trial. And
the prosecution case is that the beef Wellington is the murder weapon.
Yes, that's right. The mushrooms that were included in the beef Wellington are the alleged murder weapon in this case. Now, Kristian, today in court we continued to hear evidence from Erin Patterson's daughter. This evidence is pre-recorded. It's a video interview that was conducted by police after the lunch in 2023. And one of the things that stuck with me from that conversation that was being had was at one point the police asked Erin's daughter if she'd ever been foraging for mushrooms with her mum.
Yeah, that's correct. And obviously the source of the mushrooms in the meal are a key part of this trial. And we have heard during the trial that authorities were trying to get to the bottom of where these mushrooms came from. And Erin Patterson has told several people that the mushrooms that she used in the dish came from Woolworths, a supermarket, and from an unspecified Asian grocery. Prosecutors have hinted that they don't believe that is true. So that gives a bit of context for why this 9-year-old girl was asked by a police officer if she'd ever been foraging for mushrooms. And this girl said no. She also said that personally, she said she actually doesn't like mushrooms herself. But she said that she has seen mushrooms growing in the wild before, but it's never been something that she's picked or she's seen her mum picking. And she said that sometimes when they go to the supermarket, mushrooms are purchased.
Yep. Yeah, and following on from the evidence from Erin's daughter today, we also heard from Erin's son. This is another recorded interview. This is a video, again, recorded with police following the lunch. And this one was done when he was 14 years old. And I found it really interesting in this, hearing him talk a bit about his parents' relationship, that is Erin and Simon, and what was happening between them in the lead up to the lunch. Well, not in the lead up, but in the years prior to the lunch.
The relationship between Erin and Simon has been one of the key topics of this trial so far, and several witnesses have said that after the couple became separated around 2015, that their relationship wasn't the same as when they were married, and then it deteriorated quite a bit in the years leading up to the lunch. So Erin and Simon's son was called to give evidence, and he did say that in the recent lead up to the lunch, the relationship between his mum and dad was very negative. And one of the things that they were in dispute over was the fact that Erin Patterson changed the school that these two kids went to, and there was a fight about the dad not being put on the bill to receive school fees. And that's what he said.
It sounds like he didn't really like going around to his dad or staying at his dad's place.
It does sound like that. And the boy said that his dad was trying to convince him to actually spend a bit more time at his house because there was a split custody arrangement. But the teenager said he didn't really want to because when he was with his dad on the weekends, apparently they never really did anything, and it was his choice to spend more time at his mum's house.
We heard earlier this week in Ian Wilkinson's evidence that Erin's son arrived home just towards the end of the lunch, just as they were wrapping up. And we heard Erin's son today talking about coming home as the lunch was finishing. What did he have to say about that?
So he'd been out with his younger sister, who's 9, and another friend of theirs. They weren't at the lunch in question. Earlier in the day, Erin Patterson had dropped them off at the local McDonald's, and they'd gone and seen a movie. And then their dad had picked them up and brought him and his mate back to the house. So the 14-year-old said that when he came in, he saw all the lunch guests. Everyone seemed kind of chatty, so he spoke to some of them. He'd been going to a flying school, so he pulled out one of his textbooks and showed his granddad the flying book. But not long after that, people headed off. And he said that he picked up some of the plates that were on the table and he put it next to the sink. Basically, he says that once everyone left, that he went to his room with his mate and they were playing computer games for a few hours. And he said that Erin Patterson went upstairs in the house and she was building some Lego.
So that's Saturday night. What did we hear about what happened on the Sunday?
On the Sunday, both of the kids said that their mum was complaining in the morning of feeling sick and complaining of diarrhea. And the boy said that their regular trip to church on a Sunday was called off because Erin wasn't feeling well. He also had his flying lesson, and that's about 90 kilometres away, closer to Melbourne. And he said that he told his mum, look, if you're sick, we can call it off for the day. But he said that she was insistent that she would take him to this lesson. So even though Erin Patterson was apparently complaining about having diarrhea, she has put the boy in the car and they've headed off towards Melbourne. It's a fairly long drive, and he said that about 10 minutes before they reach their destination, they get a call from the school. They've actually cancelled the class that he was meant to be going for because the weather's not suitable for flying. So he says that they stopped off to buy some food. His mum bought a coffee, and then they headed back to Leongatha, the town that they live in. Importantly, he did say that his mum didn't stop off to go to the toilet at any point, and this is a fairly long round trip, and she'd been complaining about feeling sick. But he said that as soon as they got home, she raced in to go to the toilet.
Yeah,
it's I should say as well, it's kind of uncomfortable talking about people's toilet habits, but unfortunately that is the reality of what this case has got to explore. So bear with us.
In the interview that was played in court today, we also heard a bit about Erin's son eating the leftovers from the lunch that Erin had held. I found this really interesting because this at this point he described it as probably the nicest piece of meat he'd ever eaten in his life.
He did. I think there's a bit to unpack there with this leftovers thing. So he and his sister said that on the Sunday evening, Erin Patterson prepared them some dinner. She told them it was the leftovers from the lunch on the Saturday. A bit of a modified version though, because the beef Wellington dish that was served to the guests on the Saturday includes pastry and mushrooms. And Erin Patterson has also said that what she served the kids on the Sunday did not include the pastry and the mushrooms. And the kids in their evidence said that they ate some steak, some mashed potatoes and some beans. And yeah, this teenage boy, 14 years old, was raving about the meat. Apparently it was so good he was even taking some of his mum's share because she was complaining about feeling sick. But one thing to note about this is that the prosecution has claimed from day one that whatever these kids were served on the Sunday night was not the same dish as what the 4 lunch guests ate. Prosecution says that Erin Patterson told these kids it was the leftover, but they insist that whatever these kids had was not contaminated with mushrooms. And we do know that from the medical evidence, these kids were checked out by doctors in the subsequent days and they were cleared.
Yep. I just want to flag, you probably noticed that we're not naming the Erin's children at this point. That is because there's a suppression order over their names, so we can't mention their names. I'd love to go back and have a look at some of the big moments of this week that we've seen in the trial. Again, we've just finished the second week of Erin Patterson's murder trial. Kristian, what have been some of the key moments as we've wrapped up this second week? It's
been a really big week with a lot of witnesses churning through the court. So just looking at it from a day-by-day perspective, we got the tail end of Simon Patterson's evidence on Monday, and some of Erin Patterson's Facebook friends took the stand. And it was interesting to hear from them because they gave a different perspective about who Erin is. Up until that point, the only witness we'd heard from was Simon.
Yep.
So these women broadly painted Erin Patterson as a very loving and supportive mother. And they also flagged that she was very into mushrooms and had been talking up this food dehydrator that she had been bought and had been raving about that. The following day was undoubtedly one of the big days in this trial. It was when Ian Wilkinson, the sole guest who survived the lunch, took to the stand, and he shared some of his recollections of what happened at the lunch. In a nutshell, talking about how Erin Patterson allegedly ate off a different coloured plate to the others, how she made a claim about having cancer, which we now know is admitted by both sides that she doesn't have cancer.
The thing I remember and has sort of stuck with me the most from Tuesday with the evidence of Ian Wilkinson was just the moments of light and shade in that day as well. Obviously sharing such difficult stories, but also, you know, there was laughter in the court when his, chair sank down and little bits like that, which I found really interesting and sort of like relieved some of that tension.
Definitely. I mean, this man has lost his wife and extended family members, and less than 2 years on from that, he's testifying in court. So there were elements of his evidence which were incredibly serious, but his profession is as a church pastor. He's used to talking to people. He's used to speaking in front of a crowd. And I think he knows that sometimes you've got to inject those lighter moments to keep people engaged. And I think we saw some real moments of warmth and good humour from him, despite what was incredibly heavy material that he had to talk about.
We were talking about this earlier in the week, and one of the things that you mentioned when I was talking about some of those like lighter moments was how, when he was recalling really key moments, he did really focus in. He did become quite serious and quite clear in his recollections.
Absolutely. Ian Wilkinson can crack a joke, but when it came down to the key moments of the lunch, he was incredibly serious. And when questions were asked under cross-examination about whether he remembered things correctly, he was very definitive in his answers.
Yep. On Wednesday, we heard from a number of medical professionals who were treating Erin Patterson and the family members when they presented to hospital.
Yeah, Wednesday was really filled with a lot of medical experts really charting the very sad decline of Heather, Ian, Don and Gail in hospital. Dr. Chris Webster was one of the witnesses, And he actually gave evidence about Erin Patterson and how she presented to hospital and some of the grave concerns that the hospital staff relayed to her, knowing what was going on with the other 4 people. And what Dr. Webster said was that Erin Patterson seemed reluctant to receive treatment.
Yeah. Also, just on Dr. Webster, a man with a very loud voice.
Incredibly loud voice, a booming voice, and so loud that he even acknowledged it and said that in the hospital, everyone knows when he's talking because that's how loud his voice is.
Oh, it's really interesting. That sort of laughed, and he was, at one point even talking about how he was had to take confidential phone calls outside because otherwise they bleed through the walls or something like that. So that was interesting. And of course, this week we've had the children, not only of Erin, as we've heard about today, but also of Don and Gail Patterson and Heather and Ian Wilkinson taking the witness stand as well.
But very different children in the sense that the children of the lunch guests, the 4 who fell sick, they're adults, whereas the children of Erin Patterson are kids. One would be about 11 years old now and one is about 16. So the way that they were questioned and the way that their evidence was adduced, as they say, very different.
Yeah. What has stuck with you from this week?
A couple of things really stuck in my mind. It was probably the side of seeing Erin Patterson's daughter giving her police evidence. And this was a pre-recorded video. She wasn't there in court. But when they flashed up the picture of her on the screens and you can see this 9-year-old girl sitting in an armchair in a police station, kind of playfully kicking her legs about and then being asked questions, in relation to an alleged triple murder, I found that pretty confronting and that really, really stuck with me. And the other thing I think that stuck with me was Ian Wilkinson and seeing him in court, not just on the stand, but in the days afterwards. He actually came to court, he sat in the public gallery, the jury had a clear view of him and he was there to support his extended family. You mentioned his daughter was one of the witnesses who took the stand, but also given the connections between the Pattersons and the Wilkinsons, he was also there to support some of the Patterson children who were giving evidence.
Yeah. I think one of the moments that has stuck with me was hearing Anna's evidence. Anna is the youngest daughter of Don and Gail Patterson. And it was she just seemed like someone who really struggled to speak through some of those moments, mentioning at one point, choking up while talking about a beef Wellington. I was in the courtroom when that was happening and that sort of image has really stuck with me over the course of the week.
I think Anna was really torn on a lot of levels. The deaths of her parents, incredibly traumatizing. And the fact that Erin Patterson was in the court dock, those two actually go back a long way, used to be really close. So I'm sure that was pretty difficult for her.
Yeah, that was something that, again, it made me really think about this, seeing how emotional she was and then hearing the story of how her and Erin were pregnant at the same time. Their children were born days apart, referred to as the twins. And how close they would have been. So, just, really, really difficult to watch some of those moments as well. I also found it really interesting. One of the things we heard a lot about last week and at the start of this week was around the kind of, the loans that Erin Patterson was offering to members of the Patterson family. And we heard a little bit of more detail in cross-examination this week. During Anna's evidence, she was talking about how they'd had a loan in the hundreds of thousands of dollars just after they'd bought their house. And it was interesting, after Erin and Simon separated, the repayments went to Simon. And then we heard another family member who a loan had been made to after the separation, the loan payments went to Erin and not Simon. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, and these loans dated back well before the lunch. In short, Erin received a large inheritance and it seems agreed by all sides that she loaned out quite a bit of that inheritance to help members of the Patterson family and then they agreed to pay the money back.
Yeah, absolutely. Joining us again this week, we have Rachael Brown, who is the ABC's true crime investigative reporter. She is the woman behind Trace, a wonderful podcast series. Very excited to have you back in the chair, Rach.
Thanks, Stocky.
What moments have stuck with you from this week?
Same as Kristian, actually. Seeing Erin's daughter in that chair that seemed to swallow her. And I just remember seeing her pink trainers dangling over the edge of the chair. So she's so young that her feet didn't even touch the floor. She often puts one arm in the sleeve of another arm that kind of restless kid thing. She's 9 years old. And as soon as she started talking in the courtroom, everyone hushed, and partly because it's evidence that we've been waiting for, but also partly her voice really got me. So it was a very thin, bird-like voice which often dropped to a whisper, which really brought home, I think, how vulnerable she is. And Kristian mentioned the interview that she was doing with the detective. He said his name was Jason. And on the side of the screen of the video, it said SOCIT, which stands for Morwell Sexual Offence and Child Abuse Investigative Team. Now, I'm not suggesting there's any sexual abuse in this case, but that's the room that they were using, and perhaps using a detective from that team because they are very and highly skilled at interviewing children.
This is something that I noticed when we were listening to this evidence yesterday and today, is that the manner that these interviews are done is so different to how we've heard people questioned in court.
It was so delicate, and he leant down to her level, very gently spoken. You could tell he's trying to make her feel comfortable because she looks really nervous at the start. And that is a very specialised skill, to be able to interview children, to make them feel safe. Also, so they understand what they're answering. We've all spoken about that he started with asking her whether she knew the difference between a truth and a lie. And he said to her, "What if I said to you, I'm holding a bunch of flowers?" And she said, "Well, that would be a lie." And it was tough watching this because Erin was very distressed for most of it. Her bottom lip was wiggling. Her eyes looked very pained. She cried at a lot of points. But I also noticed that the jury looked over. I noticed at least 4 jury members look over, which is not something I see a lot of during this trial. But it's a pretty horrific thing to be watching a 9-year-old give evidence like that. And Kristian has gone through most of her evidence, but the one thing that stuck out to me was when she talked about playing Monopoly, over that weekend.
It's the sort of thing that kids remember, right?
Yeah, and I thought, that's little buddy, like that's what you should be doing. You should be playing Monopoly, not being interviewed by a police detective. So that really stuck with me. And also from The Sun, again, Kristian's stepped you through the evidence, but the thing that stuck with me, because he was also asked about his and Erin's kind of affinity with mushrooms. He was asked, did you go foraging ever? And he said, no, I can't remember ever doing that. But he did say that one of his fond memories during COVID was a trip that they took to the Corumburra Botanic Gardens. And he said Erin took a picture of some mushrooms. And he was asked, well, why is that such a fond memory? And he said, I just like the story, because mushrooms and trees support each other, because mushrooms grow onto trees. Yeah. And so in that ecosystem, they work together, they support each other. And I just thought, and that's what families do or are supposed to do, and here we're watching the implosion of a wider family. So from The Sun's evidence, that really, stuck with me.
Yeah. Thank you, Rach. We'll get into some audience questions very soon, but before I let you go and we get Kristian back, I thought we should shout out the ABC's other hit true crime podcast. It is called Unravel. If you haven't heard of it, you're missing out on one of the most gripping podcasts in Australia, with real investigative journalism in every season too.
Yeah, the most recent season is called Mr. Big, and it's an incredible story with a huge twist along the way. So give that a listen if you can.
Yeah, look, do yourself a favour. Unravel's won a bunch of Walkley Awards. It's had many millions of downloads, almost as popular as Mushroom Case Daily, I hear. And I understand, Rach, you've been investigating a new case for the next season of Unravel as well.
I have, Stocky, and I'm very, very proud of this one. I've been working on this for a couple of years now, and that season is ready to release, and we're hoping it'll see the light of day very soon. But meanwhile, everyone needs to go and check out the latest season, Mr. Big, and you can do that by searching for Unravel where you find your podcasts. And of course, you can get it on the ABC Listen app.
It's always a pleasure to have the ABC's true crime investigative reporter, Rachael Brown, joining us on Mushroom Case Daily and sharing those insights and telling us about the other wonderful podcasts that you can find around the ABC. We are continuing to get a lot of your questions coming at us. mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au is the email address. And there's one here that's really interesting, Kristian, from Pauline. She's written in with a question about the people who are drawing the court sketch artists, the people that are drawing the images. There was one of Erin Patterson that we saw around last week in a lot of the ABC news articles.
It's not just the ABC, it's every outlet covering this case is using the same sketch. So, Pauline, we know the one you're referring to.
I was trying to be a corporate man. Anyway, Pauline is asking just about that. You know, she's wondering who the artist is, how are they chosen, will it be the same artist throughout the trial, is the artist there every day, and who do they draw? It's just Erin's portrait that Pauline has seen. Will we see the judge or the jurors depicted as well?
Very detailed questions, Pauline. The artist who drew that sketch of Erin Patterson that you've been seeing, his name is Paul Tyquin, and he's one of the regular court sketchers that does work for the media outlets in Melbourne. There's actually not a huge pool of sketch artists out there, so he's one of a few. He was given permission to come into the court on the very first day of the trial when the jury was being given some instructions. So he was allowed to sit relatively close to Erin Patterson with his paper and his pencils, and then draw the sketch. And I've seen Paul's work. He's fantastic. And what he does is he sketches everything in his pencil, in grey lead, and then he goes away and actually colours it in. I think he uses a water paint to do it.
Yeah, right. And he's using paper and pencil. He's not using a tablet or anything like that.
Paper and pencil, but there are some of the other sketchers who like to use the tablets to do their drawings. In terms of what he draws, there's kind of an accepted arrangement that the court sketchers only draw the accused. I know in other countries we do sometimes see these grand scenes painted of the courtroom. That's not really the accepted practice in Victoria where this trial is being held. So we settle for the sketch of the doc.
Yeah, and will we also see any drawings? I mean, you know, we're not going to get this grand scene, but will we get a drawing of the judge or any members of the jury?
No, because Paul has only been allowed in for one day of the trial, and he's not allowed to draw jurors. We're not allowed to really give any information away about who they are. We can say that they're from the local area, and the panel of 15 at the moment are 10 men and 5 women.
Yep. Felicity and April have written in. They say, love the pod. Thank you, Felicity and April. And they're enjoying the details that they're giving out. What their question is, though, is how are you managing with putting out an episode every day after being in court for most of the day, as well as filing stories for news and socialising with colleagues? What does your routine look like each day being in court? Well, Kristian and I have slightly different routines because we do slightly different jobs. Kristian, do you want to start with yours?
Thanks, Felicity and April. I'll try not to bore you. Usually get up pretty early in the morning, calling around the news directors to figure out our plan for the day. We head into court, sit through about 6 hours of evidence, and there are some breaks in between that. So you're filing stories and taking notes while doing that. After court's done, I come over to meet Stocky, where we've got our makeshift studio set up, and we chat about what we want to put on the podcast. And then we record it and we try to get it out as soon as we can.
Yeah, my day is quite similar to Kristian's, except it starts a little bit later. I have been in court in the mornings for the last couple of weeks, so I tend to go in about 9:30. I get a coffee, go into court, sit in court for the first half of the day till lunch break, and then I come back to the house that we're staying in with the studio, prepare the episode, start thinking of things we can do, and then Kristian and I record, and we try and turn it around as quickly as possible. So we sit in here, we record the episode. The episode is listened to by our executive producer Claire Rawlinson. Claire, would you like to say hello?
Hi, joining you from Melbourne, listening in as always.
Claire is also helping us plan the episodes before we jump in, figuring out what we're going to hit. And then once we finish recording, we jump out. I get a transcription of the episode. That goes to our lawyers to be checked and reviewed, make sure we're not going to get ourselves in trouble. Shout out to the wonderful Jasmine Sims from ABC's legal team, who's been helping us a lot with this. And then I cut it out, try and get it all edited and uploaded to the internet. And once we're done, we're out for dinner somewhere.
Yeah, we take in the sights of Morwell. It's about an hour away from Erin Patterson's house where this lunch actually happened, which is in a town called Leongatha.
Just to wrap us up for the week, we've had so many lovely messages from overseas listeners, emails from New York, Bremen in Germany, the Austrian Alps. My personal favourite is from Rihanna and Chris, who are listening in Vancouver, Canada. But they grew up in Leongatha, which is the town where this lunch happened. And they have confirmed for us that people in Leongatha still refer to the Woolies there as a Safeway. This is something that popped up in evidence yesterday with various nurses and doctors referring to the Woolworths there is a Safeway.
There you go. It explains a lot.
With the dated reference. And Kristian, to wrap us up, to bring us to the end of the second week of Erin Patterson's trial, there's something that we've seen outside of court a couple of mornings this week that warrants a little mention. Yeah, well, the court where this trial is happening is also the home to lots of other cases. This is a regular town's court. So all we do is talk about the Erin Patterson trial, but there's a million other cases coming through. Many of them are at the magistrates level, which is, for people outside the great state of Victoria, the lowest level of court. So there's a lot of cases that come through. And one of the prosecutors that turns up every morning from Victoria Police, he's been serenading the reporters outside. He sang New York, New York a bit, and he sang Fly Me to the Moon earlier this week. So it's been a lovely treat to hear from him, and nice to have a little bit of humour as well outside court. Yeah, adds to some of the colour of living and working in a regional area as we're covering this trial. So thank you for enlightening us there, Kristian. We will be back in your feed on Monday, but we won't have a court episode on Monday. Indeed. What's happened is that both parties have agreed to take Monday off and basically do it as an admin day. And the purpose of this, they say, is actually to speed up the rest of the trial. And the jury's been told they can have the day off and will resume on Tuesday. It's a bit of an unusual arrangement, and it prompted a question from the jury, actually the first jury question that we've had from this trial. And they wanted to know, well, if we're not coming to court, do we have to go back to work? And because they've given up their jobs while sitting on the jury. And Justice Christopher Beale said, look, if you want to go back to work, you can. That prompted one of the jury members to vigorously shake his head, and it drew a lot of laughter in the courtroom. So safe to say he will not be attending work, and he'll be fresh and coming back to court on Tuesday when everything resumes. We will have an episode for you on Monday. We're using this as an opportunity to get through a lot of the questions we've been sent to the inbox. So mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. If you have a question you'd like us to answer, please flick it through over the weekend, and we'll add it to the list on Monday. We're going to spend a bit of time answering a few of those questions, going over some of the things that we haven't had time for in some of the episodes over the last week. So please get in touch. Absolutely. We really appreciate all the emails. We certainly do. And as well as the emails, make sure you track down Mushroom Case Daily on the ABC Listen app and hit follow. That way you won't miss an update. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast on a different podcast platform, please rate us and review us there. It makes it much easier for other people to find us and listen to the same thing that you're enjoying. Mushroom Case Daily is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, ABC court reporter Kristian Silva, and producer Stephen Stockwell. Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, and thank you to the ABC's Victorian Newsroom, Audio Studios manager Eric George, and our true crime colleagues Tim Roxburgh, Rachael Brown and Yasmin Parry. This episode was produced on the land of the Gunai-Kurnai people.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.
Pop culture hot takes are everywhere. But only one podcast helps you figure out what they really mean. Stop everything! It's the place for you to unapologetically overthink pop culture. With me, Beverly Wang. And me, Hannah Reish. Find Stop Everything now on the ABC Listen app.